Okay, hi everyone. It's Edwin Rutch from the Empathy Center, and today I'm very pleased to be with Kevin Waldman. Thanks, Kevin, for joining me for this dialogue.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
And I wanted to just give a little background about yourself, which you can add to. This is from the article you wrote. It says you're a psychological researcher studying the intersection of empathy, ideological extremism, and social influence. And you spent years analyzing the mechanisms by which belief systems spread and take hold. And you're affiliated with a couple of different universities. And you recently wrote an opinion piece in the Chicago that came out in the Chicago Tribune and several other places entitled "The Dangerous Consequences of Radical Empathy Unchecked by Reason." And so we're here to talk about your article. And I'll just introduce myself. I'm the director of the Empathy Center. So I've been working for about 15 years on this topic of empathy, which you wrote about. And I'm coming from the position that we need to make empathy a primary social value in the country and in the world for that matter. So looking forward to talking to you, about your article. And do you want to add anything in terms of introducing yourself?
Well, I will say I agree with you that I believe empathy should be more of like a global kind of prerequisite to functioning life and society, and a requirement really, and what makes us good people to each other. Um, I think that the conclusions that I've come to, which is it's fairly new. It actually is since 2023, but I've been doing a little bit of research for the past 5 years on this. Um, it's more that empathy, which I believe is very important for human beings, is something that we, like any other human faculty, as I write about, it can be manipulated and weaponized against us, and result in the opposite of what we're actually seeking when we ask for empathy from others. So it's kind of where I approach the piece from, and I have a couple other things that are in the works, and so that's kind of what brought me there, specifically like the October 7th incidences on college campuses.
Hmm. Yeah, so you were talking about how empathy was used by, I guess, like ideological extremists, political extremists, and you're kind of explaining how you feel that it's those extremists use empathy to kind of bring people into their worldview and kind of keep them in it and keep, bring them into more of an extremist position. And one of the things I find is that it's so confusing when we talk about empathy. It's like even among the academics, it's like the definition is kind of all over the place. With in terms of your criticisms of empathy, for me, it's actually what you're criticizing is a lack of empathy. And so I thought maybe we could go into some of the details if you want to continue some of the of your argument or points that you want to make.
So that's right, I think. So I believe that this kind of performative empathy is what I'm trying to shed light on. And I believe that it is part of like a Western guilt situation that we're dealing with, where there are extremists that I happen to personally witness in Dearborn, Michigan, which is what led to this whole chapter of my life, uh, where they're weaponizing our obsession with empathy, to the point where it's actually turning us against ourselves, and it's resulting in like what I refer to as like taking cover for the extremists to kind of come in, and they're infiltrating themselves into American society, particular in the higher education system, where they're going to gain more and more power, before it's, and I believe that we can stop this before it's too late. Because, in my opinion, empathy in its healthiest form, which is the ability, obviously, to understand and share another person's feelings, it while maintaining cognitive distance, it assesses the situation critically. So, like in a normal situation, I can feel for you, but I also understand that I have to assess things and have a critical eye. Radical empathy, by contrast, collapses all of that distance. So it demands total emotional identification with others, to the point where questioning or withholding any allegiance is seen as morally wrong or even dangerous, especially on the college campus environment. So it turns empathy from a tool of connection for human beings into a mandate for ideological loyalty. That's kind of what I'm identifying here in my research.
Well, let me I had sent you a link to the how I'm defining empathy. So I find it's good if when we start off, we're saying what our terms are so that we
Mm.
can kind of compare and see where they overlap or where they perhaps don't. And I don't know if you were able to see the definition, but I call it the holistic empathy definition model. And the first part is the empathy is the sensing into another person's experience. So as I'm listening to you here, I'm sensing into, how your views, how you feel about them, kind of what's important to you. So I'm paying attention, I'm being present, and I'm sensing into your experience. So it's sort of the process of sensing into your experience. Uh, then there's another, so that's kind of like a basic empathy. The other part of empathy is the self-empathy, so sensing into my own experience. And by the way, the sensing into that was the first definition is sort of based on the work of Carl Rogers. I don't know if you're familiar with him. If you're in psychology, studying psychology, you probably have studied his work, and he did a lot of work on empathy. So that's sort of what I'm basing that basic definition on. And then there's the self-empathy, sensing into your own experience, being aware of what your feelings and thoughts and your whole uh, personal experience is. And so it's like a deeper form of listening to myself and to you. And then another part that I try to separate that direct sensing into someone's experience is what I call imaginative empathy. So I can imagine myself being in any situation. I could imagine myself being an Israeli soldier, or I can imagine myself being, a Palestinian person, or I can imagine myself being an animal. I can imagine myself in any situation. So I call that imaginative empathy, which is different from just sensing into other people's experiences. I know it's a little complicated, but this is about 15 years of
I
working
like the
on this.
imaginative. I like the imaginative one. That's something that I wish I could possess more of that actually. I should work on that.
Yeah, it's like role playing, like an actor, like Meryl Streep. She takes on the role of Julia Child or Margaret Thatcher, and you set into that role. And then you could be wrong though about what you're sensing of the other person. Or you could be right too. And the last part is the holistic empathy is the relationship, the mutuality of the relationship. So you and I are here together. We're in a relationship, listening to each other, dialoguing, and it's the quality of our mutual empathy with each other that we're both empathic, listening, willing to listen to each other, but being present. And you can be in a group, and we have something called an empathy circle, 4 people, that 5 people in a group, and we use active listening to dialogue with each other. So that's sort of the framework that I'm using for empathy. And I think if we look at the things you're criticizing, you'll see that those, for example, oppressor, victim oppressor mindset, they don't really fit in there. It's actually the antidote. I see as the antidote to that victim oppressor mindset.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that unfortunately this new age of this victimizer, oppressor, oppressed is like a huge tool in this whole problem. Um, and it becomes now like this radicalized empathy is become sort of like a psychological mechanism by which emotional alignment is weaponized, especially among these emerging adults. So it drives an ideological conformity without any critical analysis, which is the sad thing because you want to believe, especially on college campuses, that we're such critical thinkers, we're open-minded and we want to learn from each other when really what the aim of this radical empathy is to have zero ability to do that, but to kind of masquerade as somebody who is very performative in their feelings for other people. It's where we pity somebody to a point that is so toxic that will just hate others who disagree or who want to be more enlightened on the topic, which does take a lot of time. Understanding, especially culture, is a very long chore to do. I mean, it takes a lot of listening, and a lot of discomfort. And unfortunately, we're using this radicalized empathy, meaning um, act without thinking, in a way where it's you can't even there the entire act is a performance, meaning like if I'm trying to have a conversation with a grad student about anything in the, let's just say cultural, anything cultural on any side, and they disagree, it's their instinct is immediately to say that I have a dangerous perspective. And like what you're saying is we need to think about what the person's lived experience is, which is how I've been begging people on Northwestern at the University of Michigan. We should have conversations among the students where it's not really exactly a debate. It's more of I have this conclusion and I'd like to share my life experience, my lived experience, and what brought me to this conclusion, rather than this you disagree with me, so you're dangerous kind of perspective. So I think that like I want and I when I was researching your work, I very much agree with everything that you stand for. I just wish that that was more that people can understand it's we have to be patient in order to achieve what it is that you're seeking and what I'm seeking now. And there's such a lack of that now. It's more I need to be right. I need to be on the right side of this, or I could be, penalized in so many different ways. Socially, which is a really sad one now. These kids lie to each other, um, pretending to have this hardcore empathy in culture when really there's no real reason to have any opinion whatsoever at the age of 18 about something that's happening over on the other side of the world. If you're just like a kid from Ohio, it's just I feel like we're expecting too much. And what's happening is there are extremists that are seeing that in American, like in Western higher education especially, and they've decided to weaponize that by using guilt. And it's really sad actually because the kids are a lot more confused, I think, than I was at that age or that any other generation, because now everything is so on display with social media. So you can't just feel empathetic now. You have to feel empathetic and then prove it. Um, and in many cases, it's with very unrealistic evidence. So it's quite sad actually to see.
Yeah, so you would like to actually have people having dialogue with each other and be listening to each other, but
Yeah.
now it's kind of more performative, you're saying, and that if you sort of disagree, you're kind of shunned or put down, or the disagreement is not really heard, and you're feeling sounds like hearing some sadness too that there is not more of this dialogue and openness for discussion.
I think one of the scariest parts is that it's the adults that are forming this the blueprint for these kids. So it's like I learned to be very like I was very quiet for 4 years at the University of Michigan witnessing this, which is when I started to do this research, because I was confused by it, frankly, at the beginning. I really thought that higher education was more about debate and dialogue and discourse, and it's really not today like that. If you are in any way, shape, or form conservative about anything, you are a danger to the university. Um, and which is quite shocking, actually, because I've seen that most of the conservative students, which is rare, actually, in these two universities that I'm discussing, um, they're the ones who possess the emotional reasoning and the ability to understand others because they're used to being surrounded by people that disagree with them, and they still want to maintain a positive place in society. And I really wish that we could approach these conversations about empathy the same way, which is I have to understand that the world does not revolve around my perspective. And in order for me to have a functioning relationship with literally anybody, I'm going to be disagreeing with them on things. And I have to understand that they can still love me and respect me or hate me, but respect me, but still nonetheless respect where I'm coming from and have an understanding of who I am as a person, and that it doesn't really affect them actually. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's more of like we're teaching this one-track mind to young people today in terms of empathy, and which is to just be so there's this unquestioning zero boundaries, just infinite amount of empathy for someone who is oppressed without even researching why this narrative exists in the first place.
So
So,
so what I'm hearing there is that you would like on campus for there to be more kind of discussions, but there's from the adults, so the older folks, they're sort of imposing maybe this mind way of being, and if you're not following or that way of thinking, if you're not following it, that you're wrong or it's not really even tolerated, and that the conservatives who they've been so in the minority that they're used to being able to dialogue more and be able to think about things and realize that their opinions is not the only opinion in the world, and you have to have dialogue to kind of
right.
work through these different issues. And you have a wish that that's what it would be, and that that things are complicated, and you have to be able to understand that I guess the Israel-Palestinian situation is very complicated, and you have to understand, have some openness for the complications that are involved there.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Oh, and there
think,
was another about the victim part too.
oh
You
yeah.
were saying something about the victim, that people are just going for this victim, yeah,
Right.
mindset.
I mean, I think that, and I hate when this word is so abused. I think there's a very nuanced perspective here, a reality about this particular, what I wrote the piece about, which is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on campuses. Um, and there's no nuance really in terms of what they're teaching. It's basically Israel's evil, and if you stand with the Israeli people, you're oppressing, the victims of the world all over the place in whatever way, shape, or form they come in. This is sad to me, not just because I'm Jewish, but because it just seemed so wrong at the beginning. And then when I researched more, like I said, I've interviewed hundreds of students and I've interviewed also some faculty. Um, and also just faculty have shared their thoughts with me on a personal level, just because they know the research I'm doing and that I'm a non-traditional, so I'm an older student. Um, and it's if there was more of a realistic conversation about like the experience that people are having or what they've learned even. I've learned this. What do you think about this? It's more like I'm right, even though I'm 19. And if you don't agree with me, I'm afraid of you.
Mhm.
And that seems, in reality, a lot of these kids will grow up, they'll go into, the workforce and they'll find mentors and they'll be fine. But there are these marginalized groups of kids though that the schools seem to seek out, um, particularly through like these DEI programs, and they they possess a set of qualities that make them very susceptible to this issue. That's what I think is very strange, or I should say, shocking. Where if you do research and you see that there are these kids that didn't go to college, they care a lot less about any of this conflict. Um, it's the campuses that are the ones that the extremists have realized these are supposed to be the highest level of critical thinking students or young people in the country, when really they're the most susceptible to extremism and to domestic terrorist behaviors because they're being told by adults that are supposed to be shaping them, to do this, when really kid or young people that are just in the workforce that didn't go to college, they're just trying to like have a life, and they're actually avoiding a lot of this stress, which I find really interesting and kind of sad because you would think going to one of the best schools in the country would result in a sort of emotional freedom, and it's really actually like it's a prison in many ways. And the research that I've done, I just did a separate study where we're asking the kids late, to describe their relationships with their friends after having to, do this performative uh, behavior, regarding empathy. And it actually has trickled into where they're just dishonest about other things, even to their own best friends. These are the things that I wanted to write these pieces about because this is not good. I can understand like writing something, some BS to get an A on a paper. That's one thing. I can understand trying to get a connection and a mentorship and saying, I believe in this, which is strange in itself that we're asking students to describe a global conflict at the age of, emerging adulthood in order to get a job, which is what is happening, at least in my interpretation of it. But um, I think that if we were to step back and have this be and have other people's opinion matter as much as their own, we would have less of this dishonesties, meaning the kids are now telling themselves or telling each other lies in general. They actually admit that they're dishonest with their own best friend about what they believe could possess some sort of negative impact on their life socially or academically. So it's not just like the emotional the emotional reasoning that's being taken away from them in the critical thinking environment of the classroom, which I could have understood, I guess, to like just get through 4 years, but it's actually affecting their social lives and their relationships, which is going to affect their adulthood. So that's what I'm worried about.
Okay, so what I'm understanding there is within the colleges, there's sort of this kind of radicalization, kind of DEI, the whole woke kind
Yeah,
of mindset, that it's kind of intimidating the people who don't really care about it, but if they step up and just say what their honest opinions are, they're going to get criticized and shut down or canceled. And that
yeah.
not only so they shut up and just kind of go with the flow, just act like, yeah, I support you, even though they don't or whatever. And then that mindset of being dishonest is becoming part of their personality. So, well, I'm dishonest here. I'd just be dishonest with family and friends because I
Right.
don't just want to create any waves or anything. I'll just kind of agree, and you're
Yeah.
just kind of I kind of upset at seeing these kind of impacts that
And
this is having.
well, simultaneously, they don't trust other people because they know they're being dishonest about things. So in return, or as a result, when, they're trying to, one of the things we were talking about is just like dating in your early 20s. This kind of, um, extreme, behavior, like the performative that we're discussing, it affects people in a way where they're just someone says, "Hi, my name's Kevin Waldman. This is what I do." They just don't believe you. Like, I'm not saying it's every time, but I'm saying
Mm,
people are skeptical about just people being good.
hmm
And I mean, at that age, I skated by and I have a normal adult life. These people, I really fear are going to have challenges. And like I said, not all of them, but there are like, and I arrived at these conclusions as a very liberal gay person when I started college at 33 years old, after having a very liberal, very open-minded, but also I believed in like the orthodoxy of liberal politics. I just like was loyal to whoever was blue, whatever. Like, many people are like this. After going to college at a prestigious university at 33, I not so much on that path because I see a lack of just interest in how anybody else feels, but then pretending that that's all they care about. Um, And if you even dissent in any way, it's, I'm a self-loathing gay or, I'm attacking this or that. And I'm like, my experience should be warranted in this particular environment. Maybe not in any other environment, but in the classroom, some kid should want to hear what I'm talking about, especially some gay kid. But they've been taught for years now. I mean, by the time they hit college, they've already in 2025, this radical empathy has been pushed on them in middle school now, even for these kids. So it's like, what point is it too late for them? I don't know. But they need more role models of people saying, okay, I understand where you're coming from, but you need to just listen a little bit more, and then we can have a discussion because the entire world doesn't revolve around like this liberal ideology that you've been told in this classroom. And they are actually teaching that if you dissent from it, it's a problem. I mean, I witnessed it many, many times. Um, that to me is something that it's just strange to like to affiliate that even with this important word empathy that we're discussing, because empathy is the thing that could solve all of this. And really, it's like we've turned this word. It's almost like the word narcissist. Everyone abuses that word too, so it's almost like it has no meaning. I'm like, I don't want it to get to the point where empathy has no meaning. We should all have it and possess it, but there has to be a boundary to which we can measure this by and say, okay, I feel this way. I feel for this person, but also I'm allowed to dislike something. I'm allowed to question something, and I'm allowed to have nothing to do with it. And this is what we're lacking, I think. That
Yeah, so
kind of
it's a whole this phenomenon is of people not being open and on being able to be open, honest, transparent, and having to hide themselves not only impacts their relationships, but also how they trust the world. They just become mistrustful of
of course.
other people because it's like I can't be honest, everybody else is probably faking it too. So it creates
Right.
this whole negative world. And I'm hearing too that you actually value empathy and the listening, and it's yeah, and I guess my point would be is that what we are criticizing, I agree with the phenomenon that you're talking about and all the impacts, but to label it empathy, I think starts losing the benefit of the word empathy. That there's other terms. It's almost like you're criticizing you're criticizing a phenomenon that is actually not empathic, but calling it empathic, which I think adds confusion. That's kind of the work that I'm trying to do is create a better clarity, around these around empathy. And the way one of the ways that I do it is with the empathy circle. Maybe sometime we could actually take part in an empathy circle. Uh, and in this process, it's sort of like the minimum viable structure for I think holding an empathic, mutual empathic dialogue. So it would be a scenario. One thing we've done, for example, we with when Trump was elected the first time, there was all these demonstrations like UC Berkeley with the political right coming out and having free speech, demonstrations, and then counter demonstrations with Antifa and so forth. And it'd be 300 or 400 people on each side, and we have a small group of 4 people, 5 people, and we take this tent out. We call it the empathy tent, and we offer listening to both sides. So we'll listen to the conservatives, we'll listen to the liberals, and then we try to bring, or the progressives, we bring them into dialogue and using empathic listening to dialogue with each other, which is what you were saying. You were kind of hoping is people would actually sit down and talk to each other or listen to each other, the first step, and then have a dialogue. And in this dialogue, the first person speaks and the listener reflects back their understanding of what that person has said to their satisfaction. So you can feel safe to express yourself and know that you will be heard. The person might not agree with you, but before they attack you, criticize you, they will they will listen to you to your satisfaction. So you've been fully able to express yourself, and then the conversation goes around, and then the listener becomes the speaker after, maybe 5 minutes. We take turns, and then they select someone to speak to, and that person reflects back what they're hearing. So we
Mm,
keep each comment is met with empathic listening.
mhm.
And even if you're judgmental, it's like, oh, you're a jerk, you're whatever, you just reflect back. I hear you say I'm a jerk, and that you think I'm terrible and so forth. So you meet their criticisms with empathy,
Yeah.
but it's sort of a structure that it makes sure everyone gets heard, and not you can't like shout somebody down or
Right.
this. So it's a structure, and we've used that. I don't know if you saw the video I sent. It was part of a documentary called Trump Phobia: What Both Sides Fear, where we had people from both sides, and it's in the video. They listened to each other, and I helped with the empathic listening. And at the end, we did 6 pairs at a demonstration, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, and 5 of them hugged each other afterwards because they listened to each other. And it starts, and for me, empathy is basically a deep form of listening. So that's my concern is by calling it, radical empathy. It sounds like it's really it's a radical lack of empathy that you're criticizing. And I think it's just in terms of terminology, it's that's my concern. Because the
Sounds like a bad
phenomenon all the phenomenon you're talking about, I see them as anti-empathic
yeah.
phenomenon.
In terms of psychology, we use the term radical empathy, and this is what they didn't use the word radical empathy in Dearborn, but they empathy is the tool that they're using to fight on college campuses. So I agree that it's a lack of empathy. Just the term radical empathy is kind of like the clickbait or whatever. Uh,
Hmm.
I do agree with you. It is a lack of empathy that we're discussing. Um, I wish, and I think that the empathy circle should be something I'm actually about to do, I think, this summer, potentially some stuff on the campus for the summer students at Northwestern. And I would love to do the empathy circle and have it recorded too.
Mm.
Just because this is something that me and a colleague of mine have been discussing. We want these conversations to exist. I try and stress to the students, you'll be relieved if you hear someone out and you don't hate their like
Hmm.
it'll make your life easier. It's like I feel that this is also this we'll call it radical empathy now, but I feel like that's also tied to so many um unfortunate and negative mental issues too, because they're so used to it being frustrating and stressful and aggravating and hateful that there's no, like you said, there's an absolute lack of empathy. Where if you just hear somebody out, you're going to be relieved. And I feel like the adults should be explaining this on the college campuses, but they're not. They're actually encouraging the opposite. And I know this for a fact. So it's stressful to see because in the conversations I've had, and obviously as someone who most of my friends are very, very liberal, and I am in a way, but in terms of what I've witnessed, it's just kind of swayed me in a different direction, unfortunately, because it's like weird to even imagine this, but it is the case. And I always feel relieved when someone will actually just tell me the truth about what they're feeling rather than the emotional response to what I'm asking.
Hmm.
Because I'm like, I adore this person, I respect this person, and this is what they went through. This is what they believe to be true. And in a lot of these cases, we don't know the truth. It's all of our interpretation. And if you can just open your mind to the idea that somebody can have the same approach, or the same desire to feel like they're right about something but have a different approach, I think that we'd be better off. And we're lacking this for sure. In mental health, I mean, just having simple empathy could cure a lot of things. And unfortunately, it's so performative now that we're, especially at that emerging adulthood age, in the long run, what it's doing, it's stunting moral development because it's also performative to the point where if you just have a regular conversation amongst two friends that are 22 years old, they don't even know what they believe because they're so used to pretending to believe something. So they don't want to hear, they it's talking points about, emotions and morality, and that's actually a scary thing at that age.
Yeah, I'd love to see empathy. I mean, be core to. I mean, I used to think that it was in the universities that's what it was about. But I do see that wokeism is sort of an authoritarian sort of a movement
It
in the
is.
sense that it's shutting down. So but I do think that empathy is the solution, and I'd love to support help in some way with holding empathy circles there if you're doing it. We have a whole community of people who have been learning the process, and we can support others because we're really trying to spread the practice because you can bring in the woke, bring in the anti-woke, bring them into a circle, and they have to listen to each other. So if you just bring people in and they start talking, it kind of blows up. But if you have people that before you get to speak, you have to listen to the other person and reflect back your understanding of what they have said to their satisfaction, it changes the whole dynamic. It brings, I think, a deeper empathy into the relationship. And I would love to see that be core to what university is about. It's like, yeah, I know you argue about reason, but I think before reason comes listening. You know that I'm all for free speech, but I think what we're missing is free empathy, which is free that we the other side of the coin to speaking is to listen. So I think we need those two aspects. I did want to just address the victor victim oppressor dynamic, in that I don't know if you are familiar with uh, conflict mediation, but there's something called the drama triangle. I don't know if you've heard of the drama triangle, but in the drama triangle, there's three roles. There's a victim, oppressor, and rescuer.
Okay.
So in a sense, we have this dynamic, if you say with the activists, that they see these victims and that they see they see the Palestinians as victims and the Israelis as oppressor, and they're going to be the rescuer, right?
Right.
And in the process of rescuing the victim, you become an oppressor yourself. And then this constant shifting back of roles of victim oppressor kind of keeps shifting, and you're kind of like stuck in this never-ending drama triangle. It's called. But the way out of the drama triangle is, I think, empathy. And it's that if you see, have people in a circle, for example, that you have to listen to each person before you act or share your own point of view. So you're instead of being the rescuer, you say to the Israeli, "Tell me about your experience. What's going on?" And then you listen, and then you listen to the Palestinian, "What's going on with you?" And you hear them out, and then you try to support them in listening to each other and creating a mutually listening environment, and that takes you out of turning people into victims. So I totally agree that there's this, that seeing people as victims is has a lot of negative consequences, and especially as it plays out in the victim in the drama triangle. But empathy is a way out of that. So when you're criticizing victim oppressor, empathy is not creating the victim oppressor mindset. That the empathy is actually the solution out of it. So that's one concern I have about your criticism. You're kind of associating that, oh, I see this person in pain. So what's happened next is they've empathized, but then they've gone into a sympathy. I feel sorry for them and I have to rescue them. And that's not what empathy does. Empathy at its core is about listening to them, and then having them listen to you and coming into a mutually listening, empathic dialogue. So anyway,
Right.
so that's what my so with the whole victim oppressor, I think that was core part of what you were talking about, and I do see that the wokeism is big on that. But so
Yeah.
that's why I think wokeism is not at all about empathy.
No, no, it's performative. Um, Performative empathy, meaning like we've discussed, the lack of empathy. So I'm on the same page as you. I think the terminology is just getting in the way of us actually completely agreeing with each other.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. It's been interesting. I actually just wrote another piece in the for Northwestern about if we could always just approach this about how I'm Jewish and I go to a Palestinian identifying barber and how I wear my Star of David and it was awkward at the beginning and we just I go there like every 2 weeks to get my haircut and my beard done and I'm like, if every one of these students could see this interaction, they would see that like there's so much more to their life than this textbook, this abuse of like the lack of empathy, and the performative empathy. Meaning, like I'd go to this place. I decided I was going to keep going after this went down, and they know I'm Jewish. They know we don't agree on anything, but we just it's so American to say I want something from you, you want something from me. They offer me tea. They offer me a cookie once. Like it's a great example of what we could all have if we just step back and listen to each other and realize that my personal belief about something that's going on thousands of miles away doesn't shouldn't affect what I'm doing in Chicago on a daily basis with strangers. I mean, I can obviously choose to not be around, and I do choose to not us to not associate with people that are, I believe, I have nothing in common with or that I disagree with. That's fine, but I shouldn't be judging somebody simply based off of something that I've never experienced negatively, but I'm being told that my people have oppressed this person, their people have oppressed mine, when really I'm like, that's never happened though, to me or anyone that I know. And I'm very Jewish, and none of us have had these terrible experiences until October 7th, which is unfortunate. But I said in the piece, if you want to really understand, and by the way, this does stem from empathy, so let's just circle it around that. If you do want to understand your place in the world, you have to go out and live in the world, and it's going to mean being around people that you disagree with. It's just part of developing as a human being, and that's what makes you possess empathy later, because you've been exposing yourself to these different perspectives. And I really wish that that was more that I just think that the barbershop thing happened to be a really great example of what I hope for everybody that's going through this college campus nonsense. Um, to eventually find themselves in that position where they're like, okay, my experience is actually not what I thought it was going to be. And let me think more before I open my mouth about this. I've had the same issue. I was very quick to make accusations and judgments after this all went down because it was so chaotic at the University of Michigan when October 7th happened. And now I'm like thinking more like, okay, um, although I still have my beliefs, which are not going to change, if somebody is living a life around me and has a very different perspective, they're entitled to that. And I want to hear them out and then move on with my life. It doesn't have to be, my existence doesn't have to surround this conflict that I'm having with another person, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, so that's actually part of you wanting to see the humanity of your barber, have mutual human interactions, and be open to other ideas, and makes you a stronger person, I think, too. So, and
And also the weaponization though, not to go too far into this, but this lack of empathy that these kids have, and then the or that the administrations have, and then this performative empathy approach, it's actually what they want is for the oppressed people, the Palestinian in this case, they want those people. Their entire philosophy is centered around the failures of these people. They need, if, in order for the Jewish people to still to be the oppressors, it means that the pro-Palestinian community needs to be oppressed by these people, which means they need to fail in America. And it's really sad to see that even the barbershop, people who are Jewish are afraid to go in there because of this narrative. And it's being created by these elites at these very prestigious universities. And the question is why? Like, why are you doing that? I have theories on why we can't get into today, but they're just theories. Who knows if I'm even remotely right? I'm very confused on why this performative empathy, which is a lack of empathy, even exists in the first place. Why?
yeah, I kind of curious too about how this came about. And I have few ideas, but for me the main thing is to keep working on the counter of having, I don't want to say true, but just a real empathic, bringing people together. So I think one of the things that is the sympathy, the difference between, I mean, is starting to feel sorry for people, right? That that when you move from empathy, really trying to understand someone, be present with them, to start feeling sorry for them, you've shifted from the other person and you've become kind of self-centered it becomes about yourself.
So
So,
true.
so I think that's what you're criticizing is not the empathy, but oh, I'm feeling sorry for all these people, and it's a bit of a self-centeredness. So in the
Yeah.
empathy circle, that would play out with if I'm saying, oh, I've had such a hard life, things are so bad for me, I feel so miserable. Instead of you, listening and saying, oh, I hear your life is really tough and you're having a difficulty, and just reflecting back, being present with where I am, and then I keep exploring that, going deeper into it. And that you say, "Oh, I feel so sorry for you, poor you," and you're no longer empathizing. So when you're criticizing that, I would say you're kind of criticizing sympathy, feeling sorry for people, which can lead to that victim oppressor sort of mindset. So again, my concern is that I know it's almost like clickbait, radical empathy. It's people are
Right.
going to pay attention. There's a book out, The Sin of Empathy. He gets a lot of attention because it's so over the top. But still, it seems like you should be like promoting a more clarity about what real empathy is and how those phenomenon that you're describing are not empathic, and what can we do to transform, like those kids that you're talking about are young people who are getting wrapped up in this, is bring them into an empathy circle so they can feel what it's really like to be able to express yourself, to be heard, have free speech, be met with empathy. So I guess again, that's a concern I have about this. There's a whole genre now of articles
Yeah.
coming out, following what you're saying. Empathy is bad. It's like, oh, we like empathy, but it's all this negative stuff, and there's not a clear distinction of the boundaries of what we're talking about, because it's very subtle. Empathy, being empathic, is a very subtle, sensitive mindset, and it's easy to get off of an empathic mindset. Like go into sympathy instead of maintain an empathic presence. And people sense it. When I'm doing conflict mediation, I mean, things could, if I don't stay, really in an empathic, mindset, listening to all points of view, trying to get the sides together, being active, not putting my own, judgments, in when I'm listening to them, it can easily just blow up. So
Right.
it's a very sensitive way of being, that again, my concern is when you're criticizing it, you're adding to the confusion about what empathy really is, instead of articulating, saying, oh, there's a victim oppressor. That's not empathic. Sympathy is not empathic. And I think you also mentioned emotional identification. So it's like, oh, I identify. That even identification can be unempathic, in the sense that if I'm saying, oh, I'm struggling, and I'm having trouble, instead of you just being present and listening to me, you can say, oh, I had the same problem. I have the same issues. So it becomes about you again, sort of like sympathy. And those are subtle, differences. And yeah, so again, I don't know how you address that. Like, can you clean up your clean up your vocabulary in terms of being supportive of what real empathy is, instead of adding to the confusion, and the mess of.
I'm still learning how to present this information. And so I'm appreciative of your criticism on this, because I think you've got a really good point. I should definitely be explaining the subtle differences and opening with that, actually, probably.
Mhm.
Because it will kind of open up the and just explain what the next 45 minutes are going to be about, is stemming from the fact that we are always confused by these very subtle distinctions that are actually very important. So that's a really good piece of advice that I'm getting from you on that. So thank you. I think you're right, actually.
Yeah,
So
that's the argument. That's the approach I'm trying to take, is that empathy can bring us together. It's what can bridge the political social divide. If we have mutual empathy be a primary cultural value, they can really bring people together, and that's really what we need in the country. It's not it's conservative, or both sides are pretty unempathic, but they're also willing to be empathic, and I've seen that in bringing people together, and people value it, and they're like hugging each other after, a 45-minute dialogue. So, and then once you start getting past that, you can start thinking about solutions. And I would like to see, a law that says Republicans and Democrats in Congress have to have an empathy circle every month with each other that's recorded about how we're going to overcome our, political and social differences, So, and we're trying to build an empathy movement to make this value, primary cultural value, and
It,
it's going against the river stream.
well, I think that there, and that article got so much feedback. And I can't say I regret what I wrote because it got us talking and here we are. But also, like I said, I'm still figuring out my approach to writing these pieces. And also, I have learned though that like, and something I'm getting out of our conversation is there is this lack of knowledge on the distinctions is universal, I think,
Mhm.
because many people have reached out and told me specific stories about their community that has nothing to do with like the Palestinian thing that I wrote about, but a woman reached out and said, um, we feel sorry for XYZ people in our community and we're giving them free housing, and then they're just using it and whatever. Long story short, that's also sympathy, basically.
Yeah.
So and and we see that, yeah. So, and I just had a conversation the other day at Northwestern where they thought they were being empathetic about gay people and they just pity gay people. And I'm like, this is not what you're thinking it is. And she was so militant in her approach, like just not able to even hear me out. And somehow I'm a self-loathing gay because I'm like, I don't need you to feel sorry for me. You can understand that I went through this without pitying me because of it. I'm here with you, fighting the good fight of life. And so that's another like very, very common one that I deal with as someone who's gay, where very well-intentioned people somehow think that they don't even realize that what they're feeling is sympathy for me
hmm
instead of empathy. So
Yeah, and there's with empathy, it's you sort of open yourself up with the act of listening as the core is what a core exercise or process that helps is you have to take in what the other person is saying. You might not agree with it, but instead of putting up a wall right away or putting up a wall of sympathy or putting up a wall of judgment, that you have to at least take it in. It doesn't mean you agree with it, but at least it's sort of registered and the other person can see that it's registered with you. An example is we had, back when Trump was elected the first time, there was a pro right wing rally in Sacramento in the capital. We went there with the empathy tent, just went to listen to people. And there was a group of five members of Identity Europa. I don't know if you know them, but they're the ones that were wearing the khaki, pants and shirts with the tiki torches, right, at
oh right.
Charlottesville. They're the
Yeah.
kind of more clean cut, Identity Europa group. And there was five of them came to the empathy tent, and one of my friends in the tent, he's Jewish, and the topic came up, about the Holocaust, and they're Holocaust deniers, pretty much. And then my friend listened to them, what their views were, actively listened. And then when it came, then they said, oh, then it was his turn to speak about what the Holocaust meant to him. And he said, well, the Holocaust to me means that half my family in Austria were killed and the other half were spread around the world. And then because the person was a Holocaust denier, he just couldn't say that. He just couldn't reflect back half your family were killed and the other half were spread around the world. And then he said, "Oh, it's the communists, this and this." And I said, "No." He said, "I said this," and he said it again. And the guy just couldn't reflect it back. He did it like 3 or 4 times, and then his friend who was next to him, who had been doing an empathy circle with somebody else, said, "Just tell him what you heard him say." And he
Right.
did. He said,
Repeat it.
"Half your family were killed, and the other half were spread around the world." And my friend said he could just feel the difference. This person, he maybe he doesn't agree, but at least he finally heard me instead of going off in all these rational schemes of trying to, not say back. So I guess my point there is the empathy is about hearing, what's going on in people, and by doing the act of listening, you have to sort of take it in. So instead of, that woman, I don't know, whatever she was saying, that, she would have to take in your thoughts first, and then it kind of just helps with that mutual understanding. And again, that's sort of the core practice of the empathy circle.
So in the circle, the person says how they feel, the other person listens, and then before they respond, they repeat, "This is what I'm hearing you say about
Hmm.
yourself."
Yeah.
That's important, I think. And that's something that, because we're so quick to be speaking next,
Hmm.
that I think that that would be, yeah, that's a good approach. If we do this at Northwestern, I'll reach out to you for sure. Um, and I just think it'd be such a perfect example. We should just do this sitting out with a little tent, like you said. And it's just important to get, obviously, it's actually tough to find two sides on college campuses. There's such a one-sided approach usually, at least in terms of what I'm doing research for, which is anti-Semitism. So, um, but it just sounds like the Trump thing is a great example too, because it's extremism also on, both sides. You're either like, I mean, that the derangement syndrome, I think, is like, should be real. There are people who are so terrified, and then the people who are so loyal in a way that it's like sad. So it's like extremism on both sides, and if they were able to meet in the middle, um, we would be just simply living in a better place.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh, great. Well, that's what we're working for. And we've set up the tent. I live near Berkeley, and set up multiple times in Sproul Plaza, which is Central Plaza in Berkeley. And we set up the tent, and we start off with just listening. So we have a little card, or if I have one handy, there's a little card. It says, free empathy is feeling, imagining imagine and connecting with the humanity of another. Present this card for 10 minutes of free listening, and it's part of our empathy tent, project. So we hand this out. Come sit down. We'll just listen to you for 10 minutes, and it can be goes longer sometimes. And then if enough people gather around, we also hold empathy circles, and we've done that multiple times.
I like that. I think it's good. It's one of those things where I wish I want to be more present and stop when I see something like that, because I just plow through campus, and if there's something like that, I think it's like it would just benefit some, including me. Like, I would love to hear somebody who's willing to hear me out too. I think that's the most important thing, is knowing that you're going to be heard, is as equal as, listening. Because you want someone who disagrees with you to actually hear you. And so often now we just expect, like, now at this point, I just don't even have debates on campus, because I'm just like, I don't feel like going through this anymore. It's like, it's okay to disagree. I like disagreeing with people. I don't care. I'm not dangerous for, I have boundaries on what I believe, um, are my emotions in terms of like this empathy. Um, Sometimes I don't have empathy for certain things, and that's okay. And that doesn't make anybody, I mean, it doesn't make me a monster, in my opinion. Do you think, though? What do you think about that?
Well, there's it again, there even the academic definitions of empathy, I think, are a bit messed up. I do kind of base the work on Carl Rogers, who was a clinical, psychologist, and he was, I would say, scientific. So he merged the clinical, which is the actual lived experience of it,
Yeah.
with the scientific. So I think that's really powerful. A lot of the academic stuff is just off and cognitive, in their own kind of cognitive world. And one of the definitions is affective empathy, which is, well, let me say, the empathy that I see is me sensing into your experience, right? You're maybe upset about how what's happening on campus. You're feeling creative about trying to find solutions. You're maybe frustrated with, the administration, not being willing to listen to dialogue. You're hopeful about looking for other methods to move things forward. So I'm sensing, getting a picture of who you are, and I sense your feelings, right? Your maybe some frustration, but one of the definitions is that, oh, I sense your frustration and I become frustrated, right? It's like I have this emotional contagion. I take on your frustration. But in the process of that, I actually stop listening to you and stop being present with you. So that emotional contagion is not empathy. It's more like a just kind of, you actually, it disconnects you from an empathic presence because I'm not listening to you. Or it can be a reaction. You're talking about Israel and I get totally pissed off and say, no, you're absolutely wrong. And I start, having my own emotions, reactions to it. Again, I'm not being present with you.
Right.
And so all those things, emotional contagions, a reaction to what you discover through empathy is also not empathy. It may be started with empathy and empathic presence, but it shifted and it becomes actually a block to empathy, just like sympathy becomes a block. But it started with an initial, moment of empathy. So that adds to the confusion. And that's
Oh,
where the
yeah.
empathy circle is really helpful because you have to maintain the empathic listening as long as the other person is speaking, and you have to be able to reflect back your understanding of what that person has said. And to do that, you got to pretty much pay attention. And
Yeah.
again, that's based on, Carl Rogers using that in the therapeutic process. He would only listen to his clients, not give them advice, not sympathize with them, not ask them questions, only stay present in this empathic. So, yeah, so I think in terms of your response, what do I think about that? It's like it's a matter of staying in presence. And with that person you were talking with, you could have asked her for an empathy circle, right? Say, okay, what I hear you say is this, and my thought is this. Can you reflect back your understanding of what I said? And you're sort of bringing people into that empathy circle practice, and it's totally, yeah. Like for example, just one person in our group was mentioning she was, driving with her son, and her son brought up an issue in the family that he was sort of critical about what was going on in their family, and she tried to defend herself. Right? It's like, no, that's not it. And he just kind of he got. Oh, it's like, oh, she's not listening. She's just defending herself. So he said, oh, forget it. You're right, or you're right. That kind of just acquiescing because I don't want to argue with you. And then she said, oh, I've learned this empathy practice. I should just listen. So she reflected back, oh, you're just seeing there's these problems in the family and you're having concerns about that. I said, yeah, that's right. And by her listening to him, she opened up. He opened up,
Right. Yeah.
shared more. And she said it was like they were driving from, Santa Barbara to San Francisco. And they had like a great day because she just started listening to him instead of getting defensive and responding. So, yeah.
And that's a choice, which I think we should all be making. Like a good choice, saying, okay, is this really worth like this hellish car ride? Or should I just, I mean, even just to avoid the bad car ride, let's make the better choice for our mental health or whatever. So I hope I wish I made that choice more. And I think I'm working on it. I think we're all like working towards these things in our own relationships. It's crazy to think how many wasted potentially beautiful relationships ended without people listening to each other. I know it's happened to me, definitely in my own relationship. So
Yeah, the whole woke, it seems like a wasted energy. If it had been a focus on empathy and people empathizing, all those millions of hours, it would have transformed the world. It's kind of how I see it. And the
yeah,
empathy circle is a good training ground for that because when you do the empathy circle, you're practicing that mindset. So it's sort of like, your neurons that fire together, wire together. So when you're practicing in the empathy circle, empathic listening, you're strengthening the neural circuits in your mind, those pathways of instead of reacting, you're deepening those listening. And I think that's something that's unique that we have is we not only have sort of the philosophical framework but also some practical tools, for fostering empathy. So I'd love to see and, support you in holding empathy circles, or we can even hold some empathy circles with our group. You're welcome. We could set a, if you have some friends or something, we could just get four of us together and actually just practice an empathy circle or something like that. And so and we also have trainings for it too. So every couple of months, we have a 4-week training on how to facilitate an empathy circle.
I think it'd be helpful and useful. And I think that there are people in my program at Northwestern that would be interested in at least hearing me out on this topic because I think it's important that we get more of this going. And I think also really quick that I just wanted to add, I think that there's a stigma with the word empathy at this point. Like I said, it's getting over and like what one of the things I'm really getting out of this conversation is that there's the lack of honest definition of empathy with among people. So it's more about I think that the circles should be happening on all these campuses, truthfully. So I'm gonna try and get it going on Northwestern. I'm
Okay,
serious. It'd
very
be
cool.
yeah, it'd be good for me even to just like facilitate it and see how it
Hmm.
works out.
Well,
But
let's
yeah,
hold one. I'll get a couple of friends. Do you have somebody? What's your department anyway? What are you
the clinical
studying?
counseling master's
Oh,
program.
clinical. I mean, that's like empathy is like core to clinical counseling. I mean, yeah. So, yeah, if you want, we can, maybe I'll send you an email with some dates and I get a couple of friends. If you have someone, I'll bring someone and we'll do an empathy circle if you're up for that. So you know how to do it.
Yeah, no, I would love that. I think it'd be
Okay.
great.
Oh, cool. Well, okay. Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. I've reached out to the, Against Empathy, Paul Bloom, to the Sin of Empathy, Joe Wrigley, to God Sod, suicidal empathy. And they said, no, we don't want to talk to you. So it's like the Against Empathy circle, Against Empathy folks are not like big dialoguers either with people who are in the know. So I really appreciate you, just being willing to have this discussion because I think it's core to, making the world a better place. So,
I totally agree, and I'm really glad you reached out. And yeah, I look forward to I'll keep in touch and let you know what ends up happening. I think I've got some people that are going to give me some grant money for some research this summer. So if that happens, I want to throw in an empathy circle and see how it goes.
okay. Yeah. I have somebody also working at BY studying her on getting a PhD in empathy. We're doing a project on the definition of empathy. So she's going to be doing research too on empathy. So maybe get to it. Maybe she'll be in the circle with. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
All
Great
right, well,
talking
thank
to
you. Thank you.
you. Bye, Kevin.